Shift happens, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. And when it does, you have two options. You can either cling to the life you've outgrown or step into the version of you that knows she's meant for more. I'm Gia Lacqua, trauma-informed empowerment coach and founder of Radical Prioritization. Welcome to What the Shift, the podcast for women who've outgrown the life they've built and are ready to create one that finally fits. Here we get real about the shifts that change everything: identity shifts, career pivots, relationship resets, mindset breakthroughs, and learning how to finally release what's holding you back. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just be ready for what's next. It's time to shift. If you've ever felt like you're stuck in a life that no longer fits, you're in the right place. I'm Gia Lacqua, and this is What the Shift, where we get real about the shifts that change, challenge, and empower. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Megan Velo. Megan is a dedicated marriage and family therapist specializing in maternal mental health. As a mom of two, she deeply understands the challenges of motherhood and is passionate about helping moms in the thick of it rediscover themselves. In addition to her clinical work, Megan serves as a supervisor for marriage and family therapist associates, guiding the next generation of therapists. She is committed to providing compassionate support to mothers navigating the complexities of parenting, relationships, and personal growth. Megan, welcome to the show. So happy to have you join us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me and giving me a platform to talk about some awesome stuff.
Yeah, this is a super important topic, and really interested to hear kind of your perspective and some of your insights, because it's very much needed. So before we dive into the heavy stuff, tell us a little bit about kind of your background and what led you to the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, so I am a marriage and family therapist. I have been licensed since 2016 or 2015. Yeah. And so I've been in it for a little bit. I started out in the schools and then I transitioned to private practice. I strangely always had a passion for moms even before I was a mom. I just loved connecting people. That's like one of my big things, is just like building community. And I just love that. And so as I became a mom and I felt really alone, which was really surprising to me because I'm social and I have good connections with people, but I had my first and I felt super alone. And just was going through postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, and felt like I didn't have a lot of people who were like, yeah, that's normal. I've been there. And so as I kind of came out of the fog of, those early postpartum days, my passion just grew immensely. And I was like, I have to provide a space for moms to be able to talk about the hard emotions of motherhood and give space to not bringing shame along with those thoughts and feelings. And so that's really been my driving force since then, is just building that practice. And I'm on social media. And so just trying to, provide a platform for moms to feel seen and heard and normalized all the feelings that we have. So it's kind of been my journey to where I am today.
I love that. And I appreciate you sharing your story. I think so many women can relate, what you said about being alone. You feel so alone in those moments, many of us. But yet when you're on the other side of it and you talk to other women, you realize that they all have a very common experience, which I think is so interesting, right? So when we're in the thick of it, we feel so isolated, but the reality is that it's very common, right, for women to have postpartum challenges, whether it's anxiety, OCD, or anything else. So what are just in the work that you do, what are some of the most common mental health challenges that you're seeing with new moms and even moms that have been moms for a while?
Yeah, moms in the thick of it is kind of how I refer to it. But I would say with the postpartum moms, the intrusive thoughts are really scary and really common. And when I'm talking about intrusive thoughts, it's often like thinking about, is the baby breathing? Is the baby am I going to drop the baby? Just having these like images in our heads that we can't get out. And that really drives a lot of anxiety. And I don't think that the actual intrusive thoughts are talked about often in circles of motherhood. I think it's happening more and more now. But it feels really scary to say, like, yeah, I have images of me like falling down the stairs with my baby like over and over again. Like that's a really hard thing to say out loud.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that I see. I think for moms that are maybe out of the postpartum period and kind of the thick of it, a lot of times what we see is this need to do it all, be it all, not take breaks, not need help, not accept help, to feel like if I'm resting or taking a break or I'm saying no to something, that I'm some sort of failure, or
Mhm.
I'm not good enough, or maybe I'm not as good as this mom next to me. I think social media is a really new challenge for moms, like what it has grown to be, where we have these highlight reels and stories and reels of the snapshots of our highs, very high highs. For moms, we look at that and we think like, well, I don't look like that after postpartum, or I'm not getting dressed like that every day, or my kid's not smiling for a picture ever. And so I think just like even the comparison trap of social media is a really hard thing for those of us that are in the thick of it right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about comparison on social media to other people's journeys, that maybe we're comparing apples to oranges. It
Mm-hmm.
is certainly contributing to that. I think the intrusive thoughts is really interesting. I love to hear that more women are talking about it. It's more common than we think. And so I think just having those conversations can really help alleviate some of that pressure and those fears and those feelings. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we're making, there's still some progress to be made, but I think definitely helps. And you kind of alluded to this, is the expectation that as new moms we're expected to bounce back really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
physically, mentally, adjust to being a new mom, to having a newborn, and going back for most of us to all the things that we were doing beforehand, right? In our relationship, in our career, or whatever else that might look like. So I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to know from your perspective, what do you see as some of the challenges that postpartum women face, and how can we start to sort of shift the narrative around that?
Yeah, I would say that the idea about bouncing back is definitely there, and a big pressure of like, I need to be able to maintain what I've been doing in my normal life, plus have this baby, especially for first time moms, because,
Yeah.
this is like a whole new shock to your system. Like, so I feel like I remember going through that being like, coming home from the hospital. I'd literally had my daughter like 24 hours ago. And I was like trying to unpack my suitcase. Like I was literally unpacking from the hospital and thinking like I should just be able to like continue on these normal tasks. And I got kind of lightheaded and I was like, I should probably sit down. Like I just had a baby. But it took like me feeling not well to step back a little bit. And so I think
Yeah.
there's that pressure of like, I should be able to just like maintain the life that I was living and I don't really need a pause. Culturally, there's a lot of cultures that support that postpartum period so well,
Hmm.
with like bringing in family members, community supports. The mom is like in bed for, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. She's not lifting a finger. Her job is to like recover and to feed the baby. And people are supporting her.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in our society here, we miss out on that a lot. It's really an isolating time. We have meal trains, which is awesome, but
Mhm.
a lot of people don't even have. They don't have that privilege either of having a meal train made for them, or people bringing meals. So, or sometimes they say no, which is totally fine too. But I think just even the isolation of, we don't have this strong community around
Mhm.
us, coming in and really caring for us and caring for the mom. That's a huge factor in just postpartum recovery and how well I feel like women do with transitioning into that period of their life.
It's a great point, because I think in our culture and society, we've shifted away from it, right? Less community, sort of more focus on
Mm-hmm.
the individual, which
Mm-hmm.
certainly in this situation has its drawbacks. But then, like you said, there's probably a lot of learning opportunities from other cultures for us
Yes.
to think about, how we do things. And I think that's a really great point. Um, and it's interesting, how you said as you were unpacking your luggage, you sort of thought, oh, I just go back to doing things the way I was doing. I think we all, as high achieving women, sort of have that
Hmm.
idea in our head, which is a complete false narrative
Hmm.
of things are just going to go back the way they were. And I'm just going to snap back to everything I was doing. And it's just not realistic. And nor is it ideal, right? Because we sort of have to shift and adjust to our new way of
Hmm.
life.
Yeah. I mean, as high achieving women, it's like, when's the last time that we just like literally sat down for like 2 weeks and recovered? Like, we're not resting. I don't know. I haven't rested since I was like probably in elementary school. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have this as high achieving women, we don't
Yeah.
have this like ingrained idea in like rest is good and it's healing and it's healthy. It is such a learned thing for us that we have to kind of force ourselves into, and we end up a lot of times learning the hard way by burning out or
Mhm.
having some like medical issues or something like that where we have to rest. And so this idea of like, well, I feel okay, like, yeah, I'm recovering from birth, but I feel okay, so I should be able to do X, Y, and Z and keep my normal life going. Leaning into the like, I'm gonna be in bed for a week and I'm not gonna lift a finger and I'm gonna let other people care for me feels so awkward for someone who's high achieving and independent. It's just so hard to lean into that role of like, I am now being taken care of and I'm accepting of that.
Yes. And I think you alluded to, so the follow-up question is like, why do we feel that way? Because again, it's a very common experience. I think you alluded to some of the conditioning. I think that, we experience as we grow up. Part of
Mm-hmm.
it has to do, which I want to get into a little bit with identity, but um, whether it's postpartum or in the thick of it, moms rest, needing a break,
Yes.
we have to normalize. What would you say to those women who are experiencing exactly what you described, having a hard time letting go and
Mm-hmm.
just taking care of themselves?
Yeah, it's hard because I do think you have to do a little bit deeper of the why of why am I not letting go? Why is it hard for me to rest? What about the constant need to go or to achieve or to check things off my to-do list? Why is that driving me? What am I afraid of if it gets quiet, if I sit down? What voice is trickling in saying you're not good enough, you're lazy, get up, you have so much to do? Like, whose voice is that? Where'd it come from? Why is it there? What's it protecting you from? All the deeper things that are sometimes hard to figure out on your own, which is why therapy is a great place to go and do that. But maybe you are able to kind of navigate that a little bit on your own and say, like, oh, that's this person's voice, or oh, that happened when this thing happened and I never wanted to feel like a failure again. Maybe you are able to kind of connect those dots, and really understanding why that is there, why that voice is there, and being able to say, like, I don't have to prove anything anymore. I don't have to achieve to be worthy anymore. Whatever it was that you probably needed to hear in those moments when that high achieving side of you was developed is probably what you need to hear today as a mom in the thick of it, of like, you are good enough even if you sit down and take a 20-minute nap. Your worth does not change based on if you take a nap or not, or whether you get X, Y, or Z done or not. And so I think that's like the deeper part of it. The more practical side of it for me is, for me as a high achiever, I've had to set boundaries around that and be like, I am done doing anything productive at this time of night.
Yeah.
Like, I will close my computer, I will be in bed, I will be doing something that feels refreshing to me. Um, I've had to set those kind of boundaries around, and I've had to set boundaries like through the day of like, okay, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to sit down And this break is, I'm giving myself an intentional break right now. My brain is offline. I'm not going to think about that. In 10 minutes, I'm going to get back to that. But right now, I'm just going to take a break, and I'm going to honor that this is what my body needs, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So I think, what you said about getting the support that you need is really critical, but just start maybe by getting curious with the stories that you're telling yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? The voices that you're hearing, whose voice is it?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are very much ingrained beliefs that we have that are holding us back. For example, I can tell you for me, for years, it was, rest equates to laziness.
Mm-hmm.
Not lazy, right? I don't need to rest,
Mm-hmm.
which led me to burnout. That was one
Mm-hmm.
obviously piece of the equation. But a lot of women feel that constant pressure that if they're not doing everything, I call it the never enough cycle. If they're not showing up 100% at work, at home, in their relationships, with their kids, with their families, that they're failing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very unattainable standard.
Yes. Yes, for sure. That is definitely a recipe for burnout, for disassociation, for functional freeze,
Yeah.
for whatever, label feels applicable to you. Those things will happen if you keep going at the speed you're going.
Yeah. So I guess the question from your perspective, um, maybe you could talk a little bit about where those pressures come from, the internal versus the external, and then maybe how do we start to break free from that narrative?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, all that. That's like, I would love an hour to talk about all that because there's so much good stuff in there. I want to say this really quickly is something that I work with clients on a lot is when we're high achieving or perfectionists, we sometimes think that if we let go a little bit, that we're gonna just completely fall into this really scary
Mm-hmm.
failure like lifestyle, right? Like if I just said no to this thing, or maybe if I just worked less, then I might be homeless, I might lose this, I might lose that, I might and that's something that we really work with clients of like, hey, if you just said no to this one thing, or you cut down hours by like 2 hours a week at work, that's let's really talk through the reality of, are you going to go into this place of being a failure or of really losing it all? Because that's part of what feels like we're
Yeah.
hanging on to this identity. It's like, well, I've always been this way. So if I let go, am I just going to like completely let go and like sell my stuff and move away and like be this recluse, And I really have to work with clients on accepting like, no, letting go of some of this is not losing who you are as a person, which high achieving is not a bad thing. It's just when it becomes, anxiety based or burnout, it's leading to burnout, that we have to keep it in check. So I want to say that as well, because that's sometimes a difficult thing of like letting go a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point because it is, if we let go one thing slip, we feel like the whole house is going to fall on our
Mm-hmm.
head.
Mm-hmm.
And then we tell ourselves these stories, to your point, that are very far from reality, but we tend to believe them. And so, how do we get comfortable? And part of that comes down to the control, right? If I don't have control over all of these things, if I'm not doing all of these things myself,
Mm-hmm.
what implications does that have for me? So I think that's a really powerful point.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that for
Yeah.
sure. So when it comes to like, where does this voice come from? I think that there's many different reasons why we develop this, high achieving mindset. Part of it sometimes is related to your birth order. We see a lot of like firstborn females being high
Mhm.
achieving. So that sometimes plays a role, which it just kind of is the way that families are structured sometimes, um, we that trait just seems to fit kind of easily onto a firstborn female. I think that for us, we also are in a society that really rewards achievements. We're starting that like even younger and younger with our
Yeah.
kids getting involved in sports and all these things at a young age. If it's a competitive environment, sometimes that when your kids are doing really well, we're praising them, and that's a lot of what we were raised in. Is if you got good grades, your parents were happy. If you didn't get good grades, your parents were not happy, and so it comes a lot from that too. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing to say, like, we're proud of you for doing well. But I think a lot of times for some of us, what is missing is we felt like if we didn't achieve, we weren't accepted or we weren't seen or we weren't good enough. And that's really excuse me, the balance as parents is how do we tell our kids that they did a good job while still saying, but at the end of the day, the reason why I love you is because of just who you are as a person, not what you're doing. And so that can sometimes drive a lot of our a lot of that high achieving personality traits.
Yeah, so that strive for the external validation, the acknowledgement of our achievements, which is how many of us grew up, then becomes a very ingrained in how we live. And so at some
Mm-hmm.
point, how do we shift that external validation to the internal piece of our
Mm-hmm.
self-worth?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah,
it's a
for
great
sure.
point. The other thing I want to touch upon, which is an important piece of this, is the identity shift that happens when we become mothers, right? We take on another role. Sometimes it brings up our old
Mm-hmm.
childhood wounds that maybe we
Mm-hmm.
haven't addressed. And also, like, who are we now that we're, a mother, but we have these other hats that we're still wearing, and how do we make room for it, and what does that look like? So, and oftentimes that leads to women feeling lost of like, who am I? So I know
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of a big question, but just want to get your thoughts on, for those moms who feel like they've lost themselves in the chaos of parenting. How
Mm-hmm.
can we help them to rediscover who they are?
Yeah, it is a really hard journey because your first year feels like just chaotic. Like I talk to my postpartum moms. I'm like, sometimes you feel like you're taking care of a bomb. Like you never know when that bomb is going to go off, and so kind of being in that high alert of like fight or flight of like, is the baby going to cry? Is the baby not? Is the baby going to sleep? Like everything about who we are is
Mm,
put on the back burner because our goal is like adjusting and figuring out this baby and how do we work together. And that's not everyone's experience, but
sure.
um, I think even just people that have a really, relatively easy postpartum experience, we wake up one day and a lot of times we're like, who am I? What do I
Mhm.
like to do? Like
Mhm.
how am I connected to the person that I was? And that identity process can feel really jarring because it's like, especially for high achieving women, like we we knew who we were, like we were high achieving and we were doing the things and we were being successful. And
Yeah.
so waking up after kind of that postpartum fog and being like, who am I, can really kind of throw you off. And even moms that are in the thick of it, we go through phases where it's like the kids go through this kind of adjustment thing, or we have this, life's change, and we wake up and we're like, who are we? So I think there's a combination between getting in touch with who you were and who you feel like you are at your core, and also being able to identify and accept this new version of you
Mhm.
and be curious about this new version of you, because self-care just isn't going to look like how it looked in our 20s, early 20s, or whenever, prior to kids. It's just going to look different. I don't have all day to like rot and watch shows and read books that I want to read, but how do I figure out now what self-care and how what feels good to me and who I am fits with being a mom. And so it's really kind of a discovery process of finding these new parts of you that can be really exciting, but also is daunting at times.
Yeah, I think what you said is extremely important about letting go of a former identity, right? Some of it we want to carry through and pull through. But I think we can hold on and have that grip of who we think we're supposed to be or who we were, when the reality is we've evolved, our life
Mm-hmm.
has evolved. And so more often than not, it's about creating, it's playing catch up sort of with like, okay, what does my identity look like today, now? And what do I want it to look like tomorrow? And kind of looking at it as an opportunity to reconnect with yourself, and then figure out, what do you want that to look like 2, 3, 4,
Mm-hmm.
5 years down the road when the kids are
Mm-hmm.
older. Because I think another important thing that you said is the identity shift isn't just when they're born. it happens with every, like you said, life event, life shift, whether it's a career, a marriage, some other life changing event in your, loss of a parent, right? We go through those periods of transition where it brings us back to who am I?
Yeah,
And being
even
rooted in that foundation.
right, even the ages of our kids. Like right now,
Yes.
my son's almost 3, my daughter's 5.5. I'm like, oh wait, I'm not like I'm not in the like new mom phase anymore.
Yep.
Like I
Yep.
just was getting comfortable there. Like I just
Yeah.
had my like mom group and like we were good and like I'm like now my kids are going to school and it's like how do I transition into like this like middle motherhood kind of feeling of and so even just like the transitions of your kids, you're experiencing these changes in like,
Hmm.
the time and space that you have and how you're connecting to people. And so even those things are kind of can be jarring at times.
100%. Mine are 8 and 10. And so it's, much less about physical care and nurturing and much more heavily focused on the emotional,
Mm-hmm.
psychological, the
Mm-hmm.
mental part of life. And helping them figure it out. And so it is exhausting in a very different way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it is like, okay, well, if I'm not doing that, now what am I doing? And what does that look
Mm-hmm.
like? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really great. Megan, just before we wrap up, what's one thing that you want our listeners to take away from today's episode for the moms, especially the working moms who are listening? What's one thing you want them to hear?
I would say that life is hard enough. The way that we talk to ourselves should not be another way that life is harder. That we have enough things working against us. We don't need our inner voice to be working against us. Um, and I would just encourage people to work on channeling that inner voice to be a cheerleader for you and not a critic. We have enough critics and enough opinions out there. We need people in our corner. And the one that we have to live with the most is ourself. So if we can really channel that inner voice of being like, you've got this, you've done this before, you can take a break. Like if we can really work on that positive connection with ourselves, that is going to change literally everything in our life. If we're functioning from a shame-based mindset, life is going to always be harder and more sad and more frustrating. If we're working from more of an acceptance mindset, life is going to be just better. It will be.
It's great advice. And I also, as you're talking, have this sort of vision in my head of the light that you're radiating, right? Or that ripple effect to your point of where you're living, that place you're living from, and how that
Mm-hmm.
impacts those around you.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Such great advice. Megan, where can our listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
So you can find me on Instagram at Mama Therapy House. My website is mamatherapyhouse.com. I'm based in California, so I see California residents only for virtual therapy if you're looking for a therapist. But if you're anywhere else, I'd love to have you join us on Instagram.
Amazing. I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story and your insights and expertise.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. And you can visit my website at gialacqua.com. Reach out on Instagram at Gia Lacqua. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. I want to thank you for joining us today. And remember, shift happens. If you feel called to something greater, trust the pull. We'll see you next time on What the Shift. All right, Shifter, that's a wrap on today's episode of What the Shift. But here's the thing. Awareness is just the first step. The real shift happens when you decide to do something with it. So before you go back to business as usual, ask yourself, what is one thing you are done carrying? What's one shift you're ready to make? And if this episode hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and send it to a woman who needs to hear this, because we shift together. Remember, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step. And I'll be right here next week, ready to shift with you. This is What the Shift, and we are just getting started.